1,335 wins, 3 Coach of the Year awards, and a legacy that has many seeing him as one of the best ever NBA coaches. Don Nelson was and still is the mastermind behind the modern basketball you see today. But here's the thing, he never won a single championship. You see, Don had a controversial tactic that was often labeled by critics as circus ball created by a mad scientist. And this tactic would also be the same reason why his career got ruined more and more with each team he coached. So what was this weird strategy, and how did it eventually become his downfall? Well, to find out, we have to go back in time to the very beginning of the league, where a young man's journey from player to coaching innovator began on the court. To begin his career, Don Nelson was selected by the Chicago Zephyrs to join the NBA. After a few seasons with them, as well as with the Lakers, he ended up with the Boston Celtics and would play for them from 1965 to 1976. And along the way earned 5 NBA championships. He wasn't a superstar, but he was a key role player who understood the importance of teamwork and strategy, and had a uniquely interesting free throw form. But hey, you have to be valued when the Celtics, winner of the most NBA championships of all time, retire your number, 19 in this case. His experience would shape his coaching philosophy in the years to come, especially considering what people said about his playing ability. All in good fun, of course.
What do you think of Don Nelson? I said, Red, this guy is slower than the turtle.
After hanging up his sneakers, Nelson quickly transitioned to coaching. He famously said he could do 3 things: sell cars, become an NBA referee, or accept an assistant coaching job at the Milwaukee Bucks. Well, I think we know he took the coaching job. However, what was funny about that is after a 3-win, 15-loss start to the season, the Bucks fired their head coach and said, Don Nelson, you're now the head coach. Yet not only that, he would become a general manager and began to show a lot of willingness to wheel and deal players as he saw fit to his vision, something that will be very important in the later stages of his career. Now, the timing of this couldn't have been more challenging. The Bucks had just lost their superstar center Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to the Lakers just a few years earlier, after winning the championship. And the Lakers would show themselves willing to take smaller team centers in the future just a few more times. But now, how could Nelson possibly compete without a dominant big man in an era where centers ruled the NBA? This is where Nelson's innovative mind began to shine. He looked at his roster and saw potential where others saw limitations. This is always the sign of a good coach. The NBA as of the late 1970s and early 1980s was still a big man's league to a degree. Teams built their offenses around post play and their defenses around protecting the paint. But Nelson had a different vision. One of his craziest ideas, as it was perceived, was a creation of the point forward. Rather than having the typical and shorter point guards run the game plan, the point forward concept allowed Nelson to have his best playmaker, no matter their size, initiate the offense. Their typical position would be irrelevant. This strategy opened up the floor, creating space for long-range shooters. Nelson's creativity didn't stop there. He would often position his not-offensive centers at midcourt during plays. And in the way the defense was played, this forced the other shot-blocking centers away from the defensive role, opening up the lane for free layups and free dunks. The results were staggering. Despite lacking a dominant center or forward, Nelson's Bucks ended up becoming contenders every year. At one stretch, they won 7 consecutive division championships, hitting 50 wins per season during that stretch for each year. And remember, a 50-win season has always been a standard metric for being a contender in the playoffs. Nelson had taken a team that many thought would struggle after losing Kareem, after winning the championship with Oscar Robertson, and turned them into one of the most consistent regular season winners in the league. And for each of those 7 years, they were second in the East at worst. This would be a defining tactic for Coach Nelson, and obviously was a revolutionary style of play that could change the NBA forever. And it would. Nelson's overall strategy in theory was very simple but radical in practice. Play small, play fast, and create mismatches. Utilized these unconventional lineups that allowed his team to push the pace, spread the floor, and create scoring opportunities that honestly left opponents a little bit confused and scrambling. The name of this tactic? Nelly Ball. Nelson's success with the Bucks proved that there was more than one way to win in the NBA. He challenged conventional wisdom that teams needed to build around a dominant big man. Instead, he showed that with the right strategy and personnel, a team could succeed by playing to their strengths and exploiting matchups. Even the great Showtime Lakers, with Kareem on their team, would still have him as their center when the game slowed down or they needed a guaranteed shot. Hook shot was basically guaranteed. But Nelson's legendary approach came with its own set of challenges and frustrations. While his teams excelled in the regular season, playoff success proved quite elusive. The slower and physical nature of postseason basketball often neutralized some of the advantages Nelson's systems created. Critics argued that Nelly Ball was a gimmick that couldn't win when it mattered most, and that's really all it would ever be. But him running this tactic in this era with this team would not be the reason it would ruin or kill his career. It had success winning, and winning a lot. He won Coach of the Year in 1983 and 1985, and there is no shame in losing to the legends of Larry Bird and the Celtics and Dr. J of the 76ers in the playoffs. But to be great, you have to beat the greats. As the 1980s progressed, Nelson's influence on the game grew. And how could it not when his Bucks had won so many games so many years in a row and gone from using his small ball lineups to create mismatches with one of the best offenses in the league to having one of the best defenses in the league? And that's because Don Nelson has always said he was innovative when he had to be and not innovative when he did not have to be. Though few fully embraced Nelson's tactical versatility, and ultimately he was the only one that opted for this positionless philosophy. And while it was in Milwaukee that Nelly Ball was born, it would end here. After a controversial 1986-1987 season marked by a rift with the Bucks owner, Nelson resigned as head coach, finishing his 11-year tenure in Milwaukee with an impressive 540-win record. That's over 60%. As with coaches who resign and have friction with ownership, this would set an alarming precedent for his relationships with owners, players, and basketball itself. The important thing to note at the end of the Milwaukee run is that at this point he was considered one of the NBA's best coaches without winning a championship. Given his success in Coach of the Year awards, many believed it would simply be a matter of time. He'd gone from an offensive coach to a defensive coach. He battled the Celtics, the Pistons. However, if Nelly Ball would not succeed, would he be able to adapt to other strategies, or would he potentially ruin his career due to his gigantic ego? And if you don't win a championship, well, people view him as the greatest of all time. He's even on record in 1989 saying, "If ego means that it must be done my way, then I've got a big ego. Because basketball-wise, it's got to be done my way." When Nelson arrived in Golden State in 1988, he inherited a team with unique talents but no clear identity. At the core of this group were three players who would soon become one of the most dynamic offensive units in the NBA's history: Tim Hardaway, Mitch Richmond, and Chris Mullin. Dubbed Run TMC, this trio embodied Nelson's vision for faster-paced, higher-scoring basketball. Nelson's approach in Golden State was a natural evolution of the Nelly Ball system he had developed in Milwaukee, but now with three elite scorers at his disposal, he could push his unconventional tactics even further. Time to add some Showtime run and gun. Play fast, score often, and create mismatches at every opportunity. The Run TMC era Warriors didn't just play up-tempo basketball, they simply redefined it. Nelson's lineups often featured three guards, Richmond, Hardaway, and Sarunas Marciulionis, alongside two forwards. Now typically we would have a center and a forward as well. However, they would use the 6'7" Rod Higgins to play as the undersized center. Does that sound like another Golden State team we may have heard of in recent memory? The small ball approach was decades ahead of his time, prioritizing speed and scoring over traditional positional roles. Nelson's system was absolutely tailor-made for his star trio. And that's the whole point of being a great coach, maximizing the talent of your players and finding systems that make them thrive. Hardaway, with his killer crossover and pinpoint passing, ran the show. Richmond, a scoring machine with a silky smooth jumper, could light it up from absolutely anywhere. And Mullin, the sharpshooter with a high basketball IQ, tied it all together with his versatile skill set. The results were explosive, to say the least. Under Nelson's guidance, the Warriors became the highest scoring team in the league, trying to score 100 points every single game. This run and gun style wasn't just effective, it was electrifying. The Warriors became must-see TV, with their fast breaks and rapid-fire scoring leaving opponents and their fans alike breathless. But Nelson's system wasn't just about that individual talent. The Run TMC trio developed a chemistry that extended beyond the court. They spent countless hours together practicing, discussing basketball, and building the kind of connection that made them nearly unstoppable when they were clicking. Yet for all the offensive fireworks, questions did remain. What would the results be? Could a team so focused on outscoring opponents survive in the playoffs where defense often reigned supreme? Nelson's Warriors were a self-described band of misfits, but could their unorthodox approach actually translate to victory? We were no longer in the 80s, and the rise of the violent 1990s defensive beasts like, the New York Knicks, as well as other teams were on the rise. Now, the regular season wins did pile up, but not quite to the same level of success as the Bucks years for Coach Nelson. The NBA world watched in anticipation if he could hit those 50-win seasons and finally break through with his tactic, or would there be something else that might hold him back? Sadly, despite their regular season success, and we say success as relevant for the Warriors, not for an objective metric of hey, they were top of the standings, because they weren't. Run TMC era Warriors struggled to make deep playoff runs and did not hit their 50-win goal. Their style of play, while innovative and exciting, often fell short against more balanced teams in the postseason. And their defense for his entire time there, honestly, absolutely atrocious. Because mismatches for you on offense are also mismatches for the other team on offense. This pattern of regular season fireworks followed by playoff disappointment would become a reoccurring theme in Nelson's coaching career. But what if he could make some trades? What if Nelly Ball simply needed a slight change in personnel to amp up that defense, give them more versatility? Well, with Golden State, he was more than just a coach, and so as vice president, he traded Richmond to try and get over that hump. He would then continue to innovate during his time with the Golden State Warriors by drafting an all-star Latrell Sprewell in 1992. He would also win his third Coach of the Year award in that same year. Later, he would also orchestrate a blockbuster trade in 1993, managing to acquire Chris Webber, who would win Rookie of the Year honors in 1994. All of this made the future of Nelly Ball in Golden State look promising. However, Nelson's tactics had caused problems with ownership in Milwaukee and would now cause an issue with his star player. The clashes over Nelson's preference to play Webber at center, an undersized center at that, instead of playing power forward, led to Webber's departure after just one season. Imagine losing the Rookie of the Year. Your tactic has to cause a lot of frustration when that happens, and despite Nelson's reported willingness to resign and keep Webber for Golden State, the young star was traded to the Washington Bullets. The same happened with the Lakers and Magic Johnson, yet Pat Riley, he might have solved that issue a little bit. Because of this, Nelson then resigned as Warriors coach in 1995, having made the playoffs in 4 of his 6 seasons with the team, but again, falling short and now sacrificing their future. Nelson's success in Golden State, even with its playoff limitations, didn't go unnoticed around the league. His ability to maximize offensive talent and sell tickets, and also create mismatches, drew attention from a lot of other franchises looking to shake things up in order to try to find a way past Chicago. And when the opportunity arose to take over the New York Knicks after Pat Riley's departure to the Miami Heat, Nelson seemed like an obvious choice to bring in some offensive spark to a defensive-minded team. After all, Pat Riley had used some mismatch tactics with his teams and had actually been to the NBA Finals in recent years with this team. Could Nelson manage his tactic with a team of superstars who had competitive success, who were one of the best teams in the league, and already had a strong defense? All they needed was more power scoring. Would he be the one to take them to the next level? Well, I wish I could say there was a story here, but that would be an insult to stories. Nelson's tenure in New York would be shockingly brief. The contrast between his freewheeling offensive style and the Knicks' established defensive identity proved too different. A serious coach like Pat Riley, who really drilled into his team, created a certain cultural standard, and then you go more to a relaxed players coach in Don Nelson, that's going to create some issues with personnel. And when their defense is programmed to play a certain way with certain matchups and you try to score by destroying that matchup, the defense also doesn't work. So this firing just 59 games into his first season was a rare misstep in his otherwise dynamic career. As Nelson left New York, his reputation, yes, it took a hit. He was good at Nelly Ball, this one tactic, and if he didn't do it, could he be viewed like a Phil Jackson, like a Pat Riley? Possibly, but only if he gave up this strategy to win championships. At this point, it seemed like his options were running out, unless he would get an opportunity elsewhere to show the world that he can in fact bring something back like those Bucks teams and dominate with a new franchise. Despite this label on him, there was a true believer in his next organization. Could having more of a hands-on approach to building his team with the right personnel make the offense tick beautifully and also shore up the defensive weakness? Or would his ego for his singular tactic cause his career to be ruined once and for all? When Don Nelson arrived in Dallas in 1997, the Mavericks were a franchise in desperate need of direction. They had not seen a winning season since 1990, and the team was struggling to find that identity. But Nelson, ever the innovator, saw an opportunity where others only saw challenges. He'd done some cooking in Milwaukee, he'd done some testing in Golden State, but this was about to be his most challenging experiment yet. One that would not only impact basketball in the 90s, but also the 2000s and 2010s. Nelson's first masterstroke came in the 1998 NBA draft. He orchestrated a draft day trade that brought in two players who would transform the franchise and the league. You may have heard about them before, Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash. In Nowitzki, Nelson saw something truly special. He believed the 7-foot German could revolutionize the game of basketball with his unique skill set. Point forward in the 1980s, how about Dirk Nowitzki for the 90s and 2000s? But Nelson's vision for Nowitzki wasn't immediately clear to everybody, even himself. The young German struggled in his rookie year, even considering a return to Germany. Nelson, however, convinced him to weather the storm, and he saw in him a player who could redefine the power forward position with his ability to space the floor. Nelson's use of Nowitzki was to use the 7-footer on the perimeter, creating mismatches that opposing teams struggled to handle. Now, typically, power forwards did not have the mobility and agility to guard someone like him. Dirk's ability to shoot from distance while also possessing the size to play inside made him an absolute nightmare for defenders. Nelson had essentially created the stretch four position, something he'd been trying to do for a while, and a concept that would become commonplace in the modern NBA, even as soon as the 2000s Phoenix Suns under Mike D'Antoni, and then later with Chris Bosh with the Miami Heat. You know, when he teamed up with LeBron, I think they had some success. This unconventional approach extended way beyond just Dirk Nowitzki under Don Nelson. His Mavericks played a style of basketball that was simply ahead of its time. This is a reoccurring theme. However, it was Nelly ball taken to a new extreme, and you know what? It started to finally yield results. The Mavericks began to climb the standings. After 2 years of mediocrity and development of his young stars, Nelson made the playoffs in 2001, the first of what would become 4 consecutive postseason appearances. And not only that, each of those 4 years would be a 50-win season, and they would throw in a 60-win season as well. Nelson's approach led the Mavericks to have the undisputed highest scoring offense 3 years in a row. Instead of trying to match the physical dominance of players like Shaquille O'Neal or Tim Duncan, he would innovate around them. He wasn't interested in cloning the powerhouse teams of the West, he wanted to beat them on his terms. Alongside the dynamic Dirk Nowitzki, Steve Nash, the team's floor general, was equally essential. Nelson pushed Nash to be aggressive, to shoot more, and to relentlessly attack defenses. His ability to make quick decisions and create in transition, well, to create everywhere, would be the engine of Nelson's offense. Finally, we had Michael Finley, the versatile and underrated tough defender. Finley's consistency and leadership brought stability to a team that was evolving rapidly. Many people have since considered this one of the best trios in the league. With his big three, Nelson unleashed a brand of basketball that was as fast as it was electrifying. It was like he could take those Milwaukee Buck days with some of his larger players, as well as the early Golden State players, to have his Mavericks play at a breakneck pace, well, for the time it was a slow ball era, as well as having a relentless ball movement offense. So this group wasn't going to overpower anybody physically, but they didn't need to. They were built to outscore, not outmuscle. But hey, for all their offensive brilliance, the Mavericks did have their weaknesses. Critics pointed to their surprise, surprise, lack of defense, a flaw that at this point everybody else was aware was going to happen. But because of how insane the offense was and the fact that his defense would be middle of the pack in 2001 and 2003, there was hope that Nelly Ball maybe had turned a corner. And even Dirk later admitted, we were overmatched at times, but Nelly believed in his system no matter what. In 2003, they even reached the Western Conference Finals. Nelson had taken a perennial loser and turned them into a legitimate contender. And it's so often with successful regular season coaches who don't win championships, they aren't even able to make it into the Western Conference Finals. Nelson had done it, but as the regular season wins piled up and the playoff runs did go deeper than his time with the Warriors and the Bucks, everyone with the Mavericks was wondering if his style of play would take them over the hump against the Lakers and Spurs dynasties, who were using typical power lineups. When you have Shaq and Duncan, how can you not? However, could this time be different for Nelly Ball and Don Nelson given the improvements we were now seeing? Now, this is not new, but critics pointed to the lack of defense again, but this time even more so on the over-reliance of mismatches. They said it was a fatal flaw in Nelson's system, and the pressure began to mount, and tension started to build between Nelson and team owner Mark Cuban. If you've been doing something for 20 years and you truly believe it's going to work, you would be called stubborn, and Nelson's stubbornness and sticking to his system began to wear a little bit thin. Despite the need for obvious adjustments to his mismatch philosophy, particularly on the defensive end, Nelson remained committed to his style of play. Imagine asking Dirk to guard Shaq in the playoffs and expecting to win.
I'll never forget, I think it was my second year or something, and Nelly came in and was like, we're going to try to guard Shaq a little different today. And he looked at me and was like, you're guarding Shaq. And I was like, what are you talking? I thought he was joking. The first time the ball goes over my head, I turn around. He elbowed Sean out of the way. He elbowed me out of the way and dunked it so hard. That strategy did not work. So we obviously we couldn't match Shaq's physicality. So we had to try different stuff to kind of be effective.
And for those who don't know, Shaq was actually quite agile as well, considering what he used to do to Michael Jordan in practice in the 90s. Don Nelson's inflexibility would ultimately lead to his downfall in Dallas. A significant point of contention was the Mavericks being unwilling to sign Steve Nash in 2004. And in something that would cause Don Nelson a lot of pain, Nash would actually go to a better run-and-gun style with the Phoenix Suns and Mike D'Antoni. It would be more effective for him, and he would win multiple MVPs. Another source of friction with the Mavericks was the $7 million contract dispute that he had with Cuban. They withheld consulting fees, believing Coach didn't deserve them. The relationship between him and the owner began to sour, and this then began to impact team chemistry. We've seen this before with Larry Brown and the Pistons, and now we're seeing it again with Don Nelson, except there was no championship. In March 2005, Nelson stepped down as head coach towards the end of the season, handing the reins to his assistant coach Avery Johnson. He remained as general manager until the end of the season, but his time with the Mavericks was effectively over. The innovative coach who had brought the franchise into relevance was now leaving again with the ultimate prize unachieved, an NBA championship. And once again, the same flaws with his tactic for over 20 years had led him to once more resign from a position, feeling he had overstayed his welcome. For the Mavericks, it wasn't just ownership though. This time it was also the players. Nelson's tenure in Dallas was a mix of brilliance and frustration. He had taken a struggling franchise and turned them into a perennial playoff contender, but let's not get it wrong. He is the reason Dallas is relevant today. While Dirk Nowitzki wasn't always very happy about the way he was forced to play, the use of him by Don Nelson had changed the way people thought about 7-footers in the NBA. And as he left Dallas, his legacy was complex. While Nelly had taken bad teams and turned them around in his career, something he admits to have done many times, he also now created a lot of problems with his exits from all his teams. Career-killing moves. One article stated, with Nelson, it's always chaos. He has had strife at so many jobs. He has burned so many bridges. He crashes and burns. His obsession with what some called circus ball had left his options and his career without a championship. Would he finally be willing to change his style to achieve his dreams? Or would he double down? Due to his career so far and how he had left franchises, there was only one opportunity remaining. But just like LeBron James fighting Father Time, it seemed that Nelly Ball would also have that same battle. When everyone thought that this was the end for Don Nelson, he found the perfect laboratory to resurrect his now fun but controversial system. The Warriors were a far cry from the competitive team he'd left behind. In fact, they hadn't made the playoffs in 12 years, since the last time he was there. His first move, though, was to embrace the roster's unique talents. In Baron Davis, Nelson had a dynamic playmaker who could push the tempo. Stephen Jackson provided toughness and versatility. Monte Ellis was an emerging scoring threat, as well as Jason Richardson being a dynamic scorer and highlight reel. Nelson tailored his system a little bit to fit these players and created a truly frenetic style that was part Nelly Ball, part organized chaos. It was clear that this team didn't have a Dirk Nowitzki or Steve Nash, but he would deploy them as he always had done, and the results were immediate. The Warriors went from a league laughingstock to a playoff contender. Not a huge win rate swing, but at least enough to get them into the conversation. But his true revenge would come in the playoffs. Could he succeed in his goal? Could he show that Nelly Ball was able to evolve with the times and the Dallas Mavericks had made a big mistake? Well, they made the playoffs as the 8th seed, as we said, fringe playoff contender, and they would face, guess who? The Dallas Mavericks, the number 1 seed with 67 wins, where Dirk Nowitzki was basically guaranteed to win the MVP for that season. And even though it was a massive mismatch, obviously we know Nelson had that ace up his sleeve, that intimate knowledge of the personnel and system. However, the doubt was still there. No one believed this would do anything because Nelly Ball could not match up to how strong Dallas had become without him. It wouldn't take long, but Don Nelson would make them all believe. His game plan would once more be to use small ball, but with some specific focuses. He used these smaller, more physical defenders like Stephen Jackson to disrupt Dirk's offensive rhythm. On offense, he gave Baron Davis absolute free rein to attack, using this aggressive and frantic style that would disrupt the Mavericks' game plan. The series would begin with an unexpected thunderclap. The strategy worked. It completely stifled Dallas, and Golden State's fearless small ball attack and unrelenting energy made the impossible feel suddenly within reach. Game 1, upset achieved. Game 2 brought a momentary reprieve for Dallas, with Dirk Nowitzki stepping up. The Mavericks evened the series. However, for Game 3 back at home, fueled by the deafening roars of the Oracle Arena who believed, Golden State unleashed a relentless offensive onslaught. Baron Davis was electric, slashing through Dallas's defense with ease, and Steven Jackson brought his trademark grit. Don Nelson had keyed in his team and found the perfect recipe. This intensity would continue in Game 4. The Warriors leaned into their underdog swagger, played fearless, team-oriented basketball, and the Mavericks just could not match up. They were now on the brink of elimination, down 3-1. Now, with desperation hanging in the air for Dallas, a number 1 seed with an MVP isn't going to go down without a fight, and Dirk absolutely would not let this happen. 3-2 to the Warriors, going back to Game 6. At this point, the truth about Don Nelson was already known. He popularized an exciting style of offense. He invented the concept of the point forward. He has been a basketball visionary. Even people who don't like him admit he has been special as a game manager. For mismatches, he's able to isolate the weakest defender on the opposition and take advantage of him the way a mugger takes advantage of the weakest, most vulnerable pedestrian on a dark Manhattan street. Now, that might sound a little dark, but that's because in Game 6, Oracle Arena was a cauldron of noise and energy. Fans sensed history in the making. The hype was absolutely incredible, and win or lose, one of the most incredible moments in NBA history. The Warriors would feed off of this electricity, and Steven Jackson would go absolutely crazy, delivering one of the greatest performances of his career. 7 3-pointers later, an 18-0 run in the third quarter later, they would just simply run at Dallas all game. For Dirk, the league MVP, he struggled, only getting 8 points. And as the final seconds ticked away, the celebration began. Oracle Arena erupted, their belief had been rewarded, and Nelly Ball had suddenly done something those thought unthinkable. Not just winning in the playoffs, but doing it while dominating a previous finals contender and a dominant regular season team. But with this victory, why couldn't the mastermind behind Nelly Ball translate his regular season dominance into playoff glory over the long period of his career? And would his legacy and impact on basketball be greater than that of championships? Sadly though, the Warriors' magical run would end in the next round against the Utah Jazz, so 2007 wouldn't answer that question. While it wasn't a title, and yes, his philosophy had killed his career many times, all this was a little bit of revenge to show that there was a possibility with the right team for this to make waves. But sadly, that would be the peak. The Warriors would struggle, and fortunately for them, that would give them Steph Curry and a year under Nelson's fast-paced offense to begin his journey. But then in 2010, Nelson would not coach anymore to figure out those ultimate questions, and he would retire as the winningest coach in NBA history after reaching 1,335 victories. The thing is, the long-term impact of Nelson's innovations on the modern NBA is undeniable. Nelson believed in putting the best players on the court regardless of traditional positions, famously saying, "You do what you gotta do to win, so put your best players out there." I have to accept that and move on. I wish I had an opportunity to coach a championship team, but I've never had that opportunity. I've never even been to the finals, but I'm very happy with my coaching career. But his philosophy has become increasingly prevalent in the modern NBA for those seeking to win championships, and a lot of them. And the beauty of it is, it was with the Golden State Warriors who achieved those dreams. But you have to wonder if he might have gotten a shot with a championship-level team had he not been so stubborn and had an ego towards his singular tactic. However, a coach who also let his ego get in the way, but not before he'd won many championships, was Pat Riley. Click to watch the godfather of coaching.